Hey everybody, I hope you are getting this. I've never actually tried to upload a video before. So it's my first go. So the gist of my final project is, well, the title's called Disrupting Whiteness Sacramentally. And I'm going to focus on communion, but in three different ways, actually, to hopefully disrupt whiteness in three different ways. So the first disruption that I'm exploring regarding communion is the movement of the sacramental elements. Interestingly, the sacraments themselves are provided for people by the church, at the church. In many ways, they are protected and kept safe from, from stuff, contamination, pollution. I don't know what words I'm going to be using yet. So the first idea I have is actually to have people, if they're going to come into a communion service, whether it's at a church or not at a church, to bring the elements into the space rather than going in to receive them when they're already there. I think this addresses issues of protection, like I said. I think it definitely reflects issues of boundaries of whiteness and how that can, I see that in the sacraments. There's also an element of mutual relationship and embodied mutual relationship as people are bringing the bread and wine or juice into the service. I feel like it's an offering of people and also then a receiving by people from the divine. So there's a mutual sort of consecration going on. I haven't written my paper yet, so I'm still, obviously exploring that idea a bit. But there's an element of mutual consecration in that, for me, that gets embodied in that movement of the elements from outside the physical boundary, the physical sanctuary, into that space. So that's one area of communion I'm looking at. The second area of communion I'm looking at, and hopefully disrupting whiteness, is the liturgy. In one of my classes, I had to do a service, and I focused the service on lynching, because Maryland became the first state in April this year, 2019, to establish a statewide commission on lynching. And we had 44 lynchings here, and one of them was located less than a mile from my church in Westminster. So our church is going to be working with some kind of memorial and remembrance of Townsend Cook, who was lynched there. And in doing that service, I switched some of the liturgy to reflect, I feel like, a liberation theology, especially James Cone's particular liberation theology, where I'm changing the words broken for you, I'm referring to the bread, and also to include broken by you, so that there's an element of, I'm not sure exactly what language I'm going to be using here either, so that there's a brokenness that's given as gift, and then there's a brokenness that's made, that is not gift, that is violence from humans toward Jesus in this particular example. And also the language of shed, referring to the blood, for you, to also include shed by you. My hope is to engage in particular white people, although I don't think, as we've talked about in class, that that's necessarily exclusively a I don't know, a white church thing, but it definitely, where I live, because it's a 92% white county and we have a 99% white church, even though it's very progressive, it's very white. So the awareness of white involvement and the legacy of white involvement in lynchings in this particular case, I don't think is contended with or reckoned with. So that's why I'm including it. And I would like to expand the communion liturgy in general, not just in this particular lynching service, but to expand communion liturgy in general to include those nuances. So there's no longer a silence around the human to human violence. So the third thing around communion is, what else is it? Oh, yeah. Is another aspect of whiteness I'd like to disrupt, and that is who is doing the authorizing, and which kind of goes back to the consecration that I talked about in the first disruption. But in this third disruption, I would like people to offer one another the elements rather than having a pastor or priest or whatever. I'm not Catholic, so, and I don't really think this would be possible in a Catholic church. But to shift the way that the elements are consecrated and the way that they're offered and received and who is doing that work. I feel like that's super important. In the readings that we've done this year is to start thinking about who's doing, the authorizing and the consecrating, and how whiteness plays into that. And it's also, I think, rooted in an issue of belonging and exclusion. So I haven't written this up. These are just these three these three aspects of disruption that I'm looking at. So thank you for listening to my ramblings. If you have any suggestions or questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.